Near mint condition, the home of collected editions.
That cover's so awesome.
Absolute format is the best way to own this store. Time to empty those wallets and fill those shelves. How's it going, all you minties? Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today I get to talk about one of my most anticipated releases of 2024. We are talking about Superman, the Triangle Era Omnibus, Volume 1 from DC Comics. So let's go ahead and get started. And welcome back, everybody. So here we have the Superman, the Triangle Era Omnibus Volume 1. So this is one of my most anticipated omnis of the year because it's such a huge gap filler. I know that Man of Steel has always been my #1 DC Most Wanted Omni, but until then, I think this is a great starting on point, and it gives me a lot of hope for what DC is planning with these books. So first, let's talk about Superman, the Triangle Era Omnibus, and there's the logo that we're all familiar with. Funny enough, they wanted to use the actual shield, which later on they changed into. This is all in the introduction, too. I love that that Mike Carlin gets to talk about that. Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, Roger Stern, Louise Simonson, Bob McLeod, and John Bogdanovic. And it is a Uncanny Omar already trying to talk pretty one day. Jerry Ordway cover. And here is the spine right here. Superman, the Triangle Era Omnibus, Volume 1, the DC logo. And this piece up here by Dan Jurgens. And the Triangle Era begins. Telling you a little bit about what kind of stories are collected in here. And the ISBN down there. $125. Now, before we take the dust jacket off, let's go ahead and see where it fits into the chronological reading order of Superman in omnibus format. So it goes right after Exile, although we do need another book in between this and Exile, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Also before the Death and Return of Superman, but we need another volume in between there with stories like Panic in the Sky. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Let's look at it underneath the dust jacket. I love the triangle pattern there. And then your flaps right here, you have Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, Roger Stern, and Louise Simonson. Your 4 writers on the 4 different titles. The S shield underneath those triangles. And this image that is blown up here on the actual dust jacket. And Superman, the Triangle Era. This time around it's yellow. And Volume 1, the DC logo, and then nothing really on the back other than those triangle patterns. So we are going to open this book up, and it's a lot of fun to get to talk about this book because on Wednesday, my Most Wanted Superman-related Omnis video is coming out, my top 10 Most Wanted. So it's going to be fun to talk about this and talk about what is missing from this era. All right, let's go ahead and start this overview properly to talk about the stories and the artwork and the build and of course the extras. All right, let's go ahead and crack this omnibus open. We have some white end sheets. Superman, the Triangle Era Omnibus, Volume 1, the title page. And then your credits right here. You have Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens, Roger Stern, Louise Simonson, James D. Hudnall, Carl Kessel, and Dennis Jenk. And that's the writers, and then of course your pencilers, Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens, Bob McLeod, John Bogdanovic, Tom Grumet, Kerry Gamble, just to name a few. Your inkers like Dennis Jenk and Brett Breeding and Doug Hazelwood, Art Thibert, and also John Byrne and Jerry Ordway supplying some of the inks, and then Glenn Whitmore and Tom McGraw, the colorists. Lettering by John Costanza and Albert de Guzman, Bill Oakley, and Bob Pinaha. So here you have a little bit of the behind the scenes of some of the editors at the time, and then some of the people that put this particular book together. Your table of contents, including the introduction here by Mike Carlin, who was editor at the time. And we kick it off with the Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, which makes for an interesting story to kick it off. But I guess I can't really think of how to better kick it off than that. It's not really in the Triangle era yet, but it's getting there, and I understand why it's collected. And also I have some thoughts as to why they started there. And then, of course, more of the table contents. And the table contents telling you what the title is, where it originated from, and what date it was published, and who the cover artists are. Here's your introduction by Mark Carlin, talking about this bright idea of how to continue these stories and getting people to follow the adventures of Superman from one title to another, considering there were 3 after John Byrne left the book. What were they going to do? And then they had that eradication story. So then we ended up getting this. So, Superman. Now, Superman, the Triangle Era Omnibus, thus collect Superman 49 to 64, Adventures of Superman 472 to 486, Action Comics 659 to 673, and Superman the Man of Steel 1 through 8. The book has a total of 1,384 pages and retails for $125. Now, at the very beginning, we kick it off with this really interesting storyline called the Crisis of Crimson Kryptonite. And what makes it interesting is that a lot of it has an aftermath of what happened previously. So it kind of spoils some of the things that happened in the previous story arc that kind of blew up, including one particular death that both affects Perry White and Lex Luthor during this time, and also what the status quo of Lex Luthor is during this particular era. Now, I think the writers do an amazing job of catching you up to speed on what's happening with these characters and what happened previously. But it will spoil some of the things that happened beforehand, but honestly, that stuff hasn't been properly collected. We've got a series of 3 really bad trade paperbacks. As a matter of fact, the actual Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite has been collected in a trade paperback that has been long out of print. I want to say that trade paperback came out when I was in high school. So 1995, 1996 is when it was collected. So what is this particular story about? I'm sure you saw at the very beginning, you had Lex Luthor picking up this mysterious red rock. Well, what this mysterious rock really is Mix, yes, Pitlick, I think that's how you pronounce his name. And he's offering Luthor a chance to even out the odds between him and Superman. He wants to balance them and have both of them have equal power. Now, what Luthor thinks this means is that he's going to become a super type of character, have super strength, super vulnerability. But what he really does is, of course, tricking everybody into making Superman a normal human being. Now, there was a price to pay for that, and that was between Luthor and, of course, Mr. Mix, yes, Spitlick, I think is how you pronounce it. So I always thought it was like Mixlip, Plick, Lick, or that something like that. I can never do it. Even in the cartoon when they showed it, they would pronounce it a couple different ways. So this leaves Superman vulnerable for a few issues. He cannot have any of his powers, so he looks at some of his friends to kind of give him a power suit. This is the fight against Mammoth right here. There is an awesome crossover, a very underrated awesome crossover with the character of Starman. Now, this isn't the same Starman that, of course, was in James Robinson's run, but this is the William Payton Starman during the Roger Stern era that kind of tricks people into thinking that he's Superman, so Superman can try to get some of his powers restored and, of course, fight off against Lex Luthor. We do have some new supporting cast members during this particular time. One of my favorites, of course, is Bibowski, who ends up actually changing his status quo during this particular omnibus. He gets a little bit lucky and ends up buying a bar. You have the Guardian here, you've got Crime Buster, and of course you've got the classic people from the Daily Planet, such as Perry White and Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen. But also other characters like Cat Grant that's in here. You do have like Lois's sister, who has a thing for Jimmy Olsen. What is her name? Lucy Lane. Does play a part in all this. Now, something does end up happening to the character of Lex Luthor through this particular omnibus that some people might be confused. And that's okay. I promise if you keep reading, things will be explained, and things will be further explained in Volume 2 when a new character shows up. This is Guy Gardner asking for help in his own way because Hal Jordan has gone missing and he needs Superman's help. And I do love this art style when Dan Jurgens is being inked by Art Thibert. I was a big fan of his inks back when he was doing the X titles, and then he went on to do some penciling, but he just wasn't a fast artist. Status quos are changing between Clark Kent and Lois Lane. Now, this is the very first issue right here. So we have all these other issues that, as you see all the way up to here, don't have the triangle years yet. So there's no triangle on these covers. It's not until Superman 51 that we get this. 1991, January of 1991, we kick it off with triangle year number 1. So what does it mean? I talked about this on my Saturday streams. I've talked about how much I wanted this. And what it was a decision made by editorial to say, okay, there's 3 titles of Superman going on right now. There's Action Comics, there's Adventures of Superman, and then there's Adjectiveless Superman. John Byrne had left the book a couple of years before this, and they were thinking, okay, how do we keep people reading the stories? You know, we can have the stories connect a little way because I'm the editor, Mike Carlin was the editor, and also keep them intrigued into reading the other titles that they weren't necessarily subscribed to or picking up. So what they did is come up with this genius idea to have a 2 right here. So you have 1 being in the kickoff of January of 1991 in Superman number 51, and then number 2 is in Adventures of Superman number 474, and then number 3 is in Action Comics 661, meaning that number 4 will take us back to Adjectiveless Superman 52. And there's the 4. I wanted to come back to this. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this was. From January all the way until the end of the year, and then they would restart the numbering process. Now, of course, there was a 4th title added, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and that is Superman the Man of Steel. Not to be confused with the Man of Steel miniseries by John Byrne. So this is such a powerful issue that has never been collected before. It is all about the story of Clark visiting an old schoolmate, somebody that was involved in a car accident that he feels really guilty for. And it's all the story of him and, of course, Lana Lang back in Smallville and how he feels at fault for putting this young man in a coma. And the parents have decided that they were going to take him off life support. And it becomes this really powerful moment on just how helpless Superman is. And the beauty of it is, so I'm glad that they kicked it off with the Krisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, because it shows a depowered Superman still trying his best. And it shows the beauty of his character, that even without powers, he's trying to save people. Even when he feels at fault, he's trying to save people. This is the character of Plastic Man joining in on the fun. But of course, Plastic Man isn't alone. It's with this guy right here, Woozy Winks, and that is his partner. And then you have the Terra Man in here, that particular storyline. Yeah, I really like when Jurgens was inked by Art Thibert. And you do have the Toy Man in here, and some new villains. Now, if you're wondering, wait a minute, where are all the classic villains? They do end up showing up through here. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are some status quo changes that are happening in the personal life of Superman and Lois Lane, or I guess Clark Kent and Lois Lane. So here's the Silver Banshee. She's back. And again, more of the Daily Planet. I do love the fact that they focus on the Daily Planet quite often during this time. This is another book that was collected in a trade paperback series. This is Superman Time and Time Again. And it's all about the character of the Linear Man. Later on, we'll see some Linear Men. But what happens here, the Linear Man has a mission to come to the past, and this does involve characters like Wave Rider. The trade paperback is a nightmare the way it was collected, because it features like Superman 476 to 478, and then Adjectiveless Superman, 54 and 55, skips 56 and goes to like all the way to 61, and then you have Action Comics 663 to 660. It was a nightmare the way it was mapped. So I'm glad that they decided to put it in this omnibus. I'm glad that this omnibus came out. So this is practically the story of Superman jumping around in time, getting to meet different characters through here, including the Legion of Superheroes. And those Legion characters are, of course, characters like Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl and Brainiac 5, Invisible Kid, who else? Cosmic Boy, those kind of characters. And Linear Man has something to do with him, of course, traveling through time. That will have some effects later on with the storyline 0 Hour, but not quite yet. Now, another character that has shown up through these particular stories, and mainly the backup stories right now, is Double X, or Double X. He's back here with the Camden Project. Yeah, this guy right here. Or not Camden, Cadmus Project. And of course the Guardian. But this guy right here, where is the Hornet? Of course, there he is. This guy has appeared in the past, right? He comes from I want to say it was all the way in the Jimmy Olsen era in the early 70s is when he made his first appearance. But now making a better impact in Superman's life. So Superman's stranded through time, and yet somehow he makes it back. However, when he does make it back, the world has changed. And he has to set things right when this particular world has changed. Tom Grummett now ends up joining the creative team, and we're about to head into another era of Superman coming up soon. After this entire world doesn't seem right, he has to set things the way that he thinks should have been set. And it makes for a really interesting story, a very compelling story. And here we go. Now we kick it off with the era of Superman, the Man of Steel. 48-page first issue by Louise Simonson and John Bogdanove. Love that painted cover, always have. And this is the series that came out in 1991. There it is, the 19th Superman comic. So now we have 4 titles because of this. And in this particular storyline, we do have characters again of Bebo. Oh man, Wheezy loved Bebo Bebowski. But also like Cat Grant, Ella Lane, Emil Hamilton, Gangbuster, Jose Delgado, that guy. And you'll also see other characters like Lana Lang and the Kent family, Ma and Pa Kent through here. Perry White and Pete Ross. Now, the character that comes back through here, this is why I find really interesting, is a character that showed up in a previous storyline. And I think in here you do get to find a little bit more about that character. And there is an old trade paperback called Superman Eradication. That's why I'm hoping one day we'll get like a Superman Eradication storyline, because we have enough issues to make an omnibus between Exile and this omnibus, and we have definitely enough issues to make another omnibus between this and the Death and Return of Superman omnibus. So this particular character comes back for this story, and it's like a 6-parter storyline that goes on through all of the comics, including the new one. I do think like Louise immediately went from one particular crossover. So issue number 2, well, no, actually, this is one of the few issues she didn't have to do a crossover, because issue number 3 definitely has a crossover with War of the Gods. So it's like a Wonder Woman crossover. And we have the return of classic villains like the Parasite. Now, somebody is about to make an entrance here. Somebody new to the world of Superman. This is the Man of Steel number 3, already part of the War of the Gods crossover. It's already getting involved with the crossover with Wonder Woman. Finally, we get an issue where both Superman and Lois Lane just kind of have a nice date out. But then again, you can't really have a nice date out when it's Superman and Lois Lane together. We have the return of Parasite through these issues here, who hasn't been shown for a while. I love when he gets to spend time with his mom and dad back in Smallville. And we have the introduction of Thorn to Metropolis and her perhaps fighting crime with Gangbuster. This is Angstrom. And of course the rest of the Parasite gang. And then the inter-gang stories told through here. Now, there is an interesting character that shows up through here that will play a big part, mainly towards the end of this volume, but also in volume 2. And let's actually get over there. This is the Agent Liberty right here. Plays a good supporting cast member. He's another character that is a crime fighter, if you will. There's one issue in here I wanted to talk about. This is the crossover with Armageddon, 1991. That features the characters of Wave Rider and, again, Monarch. But some of the linear men making a return here. This story right here, The Curse of the Atomic Skull, get ready for this, is all told in this landscape format. So it's like a movie reel playing here as to who the Atomic Skull was. And then you have present day, including Bibbo right there, making an appearance. But the character that I wanted to talk about doesn't appear. This is the follow-up to Time and Time Again right here. This particular character doesn't appear until, I believe it's the next issue, where he makes his real full appearance. So, in this particular era, we do have somebody that confuses people because of his role that he had to play in the pages of Death and Return of Superman. And that is this character known as Alexander Luthor. And Alexander Luthor, and should be coming up, let's see, there he is right here. This is Lex Luthor II. This is the guy with the red hair and the red beard. He claims to be Lex Luthor's son and heir to the fortune of Luthor Incorporated. So this guy plays a small part here towards the ending of this particular omnibus, but more of a bigger role in the second omnibus of the Triangle Years. And of course, a big role during the Death and Return of Superman with Supergirl. And that is, of course, Matrix Supergirl. So even though you get to know him here a little bit, you'll get more of an answer later on in what will be Volume 2. There might be a wedding here, might be wedding bells for Superman, but when Lois Lane gets involved, yeah, that ain't happening at all. Brett Breeding now joining the inking duties. And this is the Blackout storyline, if I'm... Yeah, Blackout right here. That's what's going on through this particular omnibus. And again, Lex Luthor II making his move in the corporate industry. Doesn't really say anything about like Superman, like wanting to go after Superman. As a matter of fact, he's like kind of a cool cat at first. Really smooth with the ladies, really smooth with the rest of his business partners. Doesn't seem to have a grudge with Superman, but then later on you'll start seeing some things pop up, especially in the way that he thinks. These are the Intergang storylines. Oh, and over here, this is a really cool throwback to a very special lady in Superman's past. And maybe some of you might remember who she is if you read something like... Oh, actually, she was brought back in the Man of Steel. So if you have those Man of Steel hardcovers, Lori Lemaris, that's her name. That particular mermaid does make a cameo appearance in here. But the last few stories collected in here are all the Intergang storylines. So you have the characters of... Who are they? Bruno and Gillespie and Morgan Edge. And one particular parademon. And there's Blockhouse and Jolt. That end up wrapping up this particular omnibus as far as the new villains that are introduced through here. All the way in the back, you do have some... This is the trade paperback I was talking about. The Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite. You have an introduction here by Roger Stern. From that 1994 trade... Oh my gosh, 1994 trade paperback? Or 96 trade paperback. This is the 94 trade paperback Time and Time Again. And then you have some original sketches here by Mike Carlin. And then the completed inked covers by Jerry Ordway. More original Jerry Ordway art, including original artwork for some iconic moments through here. Trade paperback covers. Dan Jurgens and Art Thibert and Brett Breeding. That is an awesome picture right there. And all this with this type of pattern, the triangle patterns all around the plot outline. And then the bio on the top build creators here, like Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, Roger Stern, Louise Simonson, John Bogdanove, Carl Kessel, and Bob McLeod. And then your end sheets. Now let's talk about the binding and the build. The book has 1,384 pages. It does have sewn binding. Let's move it down a little bit and talk about the build of it. So, sewn binding, and it does have this new paper stock that isn't quite glossy. It's not quite matte paper, but it's definitely thinner than what it used to be. So there is bleed through happening. It's a little bit of bleed through. It's not too bad. I've seen a lot worse and I've seen better, but there is some minor bleed through happening. And as far as the way the book lays over, let's look at some spread pages. Let me see if I can find some. Aha, perfect. The actual credits page is a spread page. So get a little minor gutter loss here. Let's actually look at the one in the very back because it's a actual 2-page spread of an original piece by Jurgens. Yeah, right here in Brett Breeding. So you do have just minor gutter loss. Not bad at all. Like I said, I've seen worse and I've seen better. But that is it. This is one of my most anticipated gap fillers. I love the stories in here. I realize they're not for everybody. Some people might be looking at this and going, man, there is not that much adventure or action happening in those stories. I can see that, but for me, I love the buildup of some of the supporting cast, especially like Kat and Jose and how they end up getting together, the Cadmus project and what they're doing with Guardian, the buildup of these new super villains, and then the return of a super villain that you're like, wait, who exactly is this guy claiming to be Lex Luthor's son? And I promise things will be revealed as the story progresses, and I can't wait for more of Omnis of this era. I can't wait for a volume 2, and hopefully some kind of eradication, or that's what I would call it, the Eradication Saga Omnibus. But that's it. That, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this Omnibus, don't forget to check out our sponsors.
If you're in Europe and you're interested in buying these books, definitely check out Walt's Comic Shop in Berlin, Germany. They have the cheapest pre-order prices, flat shipping rate of €12 for all EU countries, emails answered within 24 hours, waltscomicshop.com, and you can use the code nearmintcondition at checkout and get free shipping for all EU countries with your first order over €40. That's Walt's Comic Shop, your reliable source for omnis and premium collected editions in Europe. Ding!
cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget, the CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more.
And that was the content, the page count, and build of this book. Let me know in the comments down below if you plan on picking this up, if you have some of the trade paperbacks, if you're upgrading to this, if you're hoping one day we get that Eradication era Omnibus, and then of course, Volume 2, and how do you think they're going to map the death and return of Superman Omni era? Do you think it will become the Triangle era Volume 3, or will they just go around the death and return? Love to know all those comments down below. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Everyone stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.